House File 1260, timber permit terms modified. And we're going to about 9:50 on this. Representative Eklund, would you move House File 1260 be laid over for possible inclusion in the omnibus bill?
That is my motion, Mr. Chair.
Representative Eklund, I believe you have an author's amendment.
I do, Mr. Chair. I will move the DE1 amendment. House File 1260 DE1.
Representative Eklund moves the DE1 amendment to get the bill in the form the author would like. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? Ayes have it. The amendment is adopted. Representative Eklund, to your bill as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, House File 1260 as amended offers relief to holders of DNR timber permits that were adversely affected by the COVID pandemic and the resulting downturn of Minnesota's forest products industry. That included the COVID-related closure of the Verso paper mill in Duluth, Minnesota. Timber permits were purchased to supply that mill, and after it closed, the value of those permits have been significantly impacted. House File 1260 as amended seeks to not only help provide relief to those permit holders of state timber sales, but keeps rural Minnesota communities strong. It will also allow our loggers to continue the important work of helping to keep our forests healthy and supplying fiber to our mills. I have three testifiers joining me today, two representing the Minnesota Logging Community, Mike Birkeland and Scott Dain. Mike is from Minnesota Forest Industry. Scott Dain is from the Associated Contract Loggers and Truckers. And then DNR personnel to speak to the merits of the bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members.
And testifiers, if you could limit your testimony to 1 to 2 minutes. Mr. Birkeland, welcome to the committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Mike Birkeland, and I am here today representing the Minnesota Timber Producers Association and Minnesota Forest Industries, the thousands of men and women who work in the woods and in the mills in Minnesota. And this relief will be helpful. I'd like to thank Representative Eklund for bringing this forward, and I want to testify today in support of House File 1260. It's needed and necessary for lots of reasons. There were significant ripple effects on Minnesota's logging community after the closure of the Verso mills last summer. And, primarily impacted loggers who harvest spruce and balsam trees. So think of your classic Christmas trees, some birch in that component as well. But Verso in Duluth was using about 50% of the spruce and balsam in the state. And following those mill closures, very few places for that wood to go. So the market was flooded with spruce and balsam, and loggers were stuck with down payments on state timber sales. A couple of important considerations. There is precedence. The legislature has stepped up in the past and provided assistance and help and relief. That happened in 2007 with several mill closures in the state, and in 2013 when we had a couple of other mills that were shut down and the industry was impacted. A couple of examples to provide for you here as well. For small and large loggers alike, this has significant impacts. One logger in northern Minnesota, just north of Duluth, has about $140,000 in commitments on spruce and balsam sales alone, with no market really, hardly any market at all anymore for that wood to go. So a relief package would allow him to recover his costs on these species that have very few markets and now have dropped in value. And the timber sale last year that contained mostly spruce and balsam that was worth about $80,000 is worth about half that today. So we would just like to encourage you to think about providing some much needed relief for loggers in this regard to keep our communities, our rural communities healthy, our forests healthy, and our loggers and the families and employees that they support healthy as well. We really do appreciate your consideration and support. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Birkeland. Mr. Dain, welcome to the committee, and state your name and who you're with.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay? Yes. My name is Scott Dain. I'm the Executive Director of the Associated Contract Loggers and Truckers of Minnesota. And Mr. Chair, committee members, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of this important bill. And thank Representative Eklund for sponsoring it, as well as the co-sponsors on this bill. This is the highest priority for the Minnesota timber industry that we are trying to get addressed to provide some aid and assistance to them. all portions of this legislation are important for various reasons. If we're going to address the true threats and challenges that are compromising the viability and the stability of Minnesota's timber industry. So all three components, major components of this legislation are very important. Mike had shared an example with you, which is a terrific example. And as another example, we've got a logger up in northern Minnesota that is operating a U.S. Forest Service timber sale under the Good Neighbor Authority, which allows the DNR to administer U.S. Forest Service sales to assist the U.S. Forest Service. He has started that sale, and because he started that sale, he is liable for 100% of the standing value of that. That's going to cost him over $100,000. These situations have the potential of bankrupting many Minnesota logging companies. So those components are critical, but it's more important, it's bigger than loggers and logging. As you saw from the attachment that I shared with you, titled Save Our Forests, forest management, healthy forests contribute to reducing wildfire, to wildlife habitat development, to actually carbon sequestration, and recreational use of our forests. So it's far bigger than just loggers and the logging industry. If we're going to have healthy forests and derive those benefits that we noted on that paper, we need a healthy logging industry in Minnesota. Loggers are trying to wrap up the harvest season. In fact, they're expecting road bans to go on next week, which will shut down the timber operations. So those guys are in the woods scrambling right now. But I'd like to share a couple of quotes in their words from them. We have the opportunity to speak on their behalf, Mike and I do, but it's their livelihoods and their lives that are being impacted by this, aside from those examples. One quote from Greg Tibbetts: "The impacts of the Verso shutdown are far more than the 200 mill workers. It's probably more like 1,000 people affected when you look at the big picture. Short term, I'm okay, but long term, I'm not sure. Pretty uncertain." Mike Nielsen, a logger out of Ely, Minnesota, was quoted in this week's newspaper, the Duluth News Tribune. "We need another mill up here. We've got 20 to 30% too many loggers for the mills that we have right now. We don't have too many loggers. We have too few mills." This assistance that you have the opportunity to support today and pass will enable these loggers to survive to support the existing mills and not lose any more mills, and then to support future mills as well. So counties and the federal government have taken substantial steps to assist the timber industry through this pandemic and the impacts of it. And now is an opportunity for the state to join these other public land management entities and support this legislation as well. I'd be happy to answer questions after the other testimonies or follow up as needed, but I really ask that you support this bill for Minnesota's timber industry and all the benefits that are derived for the state of Minnesota. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Forrest Bowe, Minnesota DNR, 1 minute.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members. My name is Forrest Bowe. I'm the Director of Forestry with the Minnesota DNR. We too appreciate this bill being brought forward. There has clearly been impacts up and down our system of logging and industry in the state. Just to give you a sense, Verso was our 5th largest mill in Minnesota. They used 43% of the states of the DNR's balsam and spruce. So they were the largest consumer of our balsam and spruce. The announcement that Verso that came from Verso happened just days after we had our big spring auction, and so it really left those loggers holding permits that had a lot less value, I guess, to be real blunt. And so we do really appreciate this bill being brought forward. Just to give you a sense, In total, we have 1,800 permits on all DNR lands worth $55 million. If you think about just the balsam and spruce that this would cover, there's still over 300 permits worth $7.5 million. And so this is a big deal. We've collected over $1 million in down payments on those permits that are identified in the bill. We did do some things right away, things that we could do in current statute limitations. We offered a 1-year interest-free permit. We started to reduce the price on at our auctions after that, and we made balsam optional. In other words, the logger could purchase the balsam if they wanted, or it would be an optional species on a permit. Beyond these actions, legislative help is needed, and that's what's being offered here today. Thank you.
Thank you. And we have a couple questions, Representative Lewick and then Representative Jordan. Representative Lewick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to add my thanks to both the testifiers and the bill author. It's important to realize that there's concern. Those trees are still standing out there, so they're not going to go away, and they'll be available in the future. But without this kind of a sort of attempt to fix, we could certainly be in danger of not having the commercial industry available to harvest them. So again, I want to thank all the testifiers and the Department of Natural Resources. This is badly needed across all of Minnesota, where forestry is a huge part of our economy. Thank you.
Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my question is for Mr. Birkeland. Can you talk to me a little bit about how COVID contributed to some of the decline that we're seeing today? Is it mostly because of the paper industry? Is it because of the Verso mill closure? Or are there other factors included as well?
Mr. Birkeland.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Jordan. And I think the best answer to the question is COVID-19 impacted, especially early on, the paper industry significantly. You know, most of the mills in Minnesota have weathered the storm, especially on the paper side. Building products have been affected a little bit differently, but what you see is the fact that, you know, as some of you are now working from your office, but most businesses and most employees are still working from home. Most kids are just starting to get back to school. And so there's just not a lot of paper usage in the markets that our mills manufacture paper for, or even the types of magazines that are being read. And so COVID-19 took Verso over the edge in both of the facilities, not only Duluth, but Wisconsin Rapids as well. So it affected the end use markets, which carries back all the way through to the markets for wood that comes out of our forests in Minnesota.
Thank you. That's really helpful.
Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Birkeland, for that answer. I'm really glad that, you know, we as a state I think this is a great bill. I'm happy to support it. I'm really glad that we as a state can acknowledge that a crisis in one community is a crisis in all of our communities, and that we're all coming together to really make sure that we're uplifting everyone in Minnesota. And so I hope we can really think about this when we're going forward and working on bills to uplift all of our communities. Thanks.
Representative Eklund, any closing remarks?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members, and thank you to the testifiers. We are at a phase in the forest products industry where if we don't help the loggers out that are holding these contracts, that we may lose them. And then if we lose them, then we start losing the mills that they supply, because we need these suppliers to get the timber to the market. We need these suppliers to help the DNR manage our forests and keep them healthy. And we need this to keep northern Minnesota economies running. So I appreciate the support, Mr. Chair, members, and I appreciate the time.
Representative Eklund renews his motion that House File 1260 as amended be laid over for possible inclusion in the omnibus bill. The bill is laid over.